The modern person has no soul. Jung on the spiritual emptiness of our age. Have you ever felt this strange emptiness? Like something fundamental is missing from modern life, even when everything looks perfect on the surface? Imagine this. You've got the job, the home, the relationships, all the things society told you would bring fulfillment. You've done everything right, so why does it still feel like something essential is missing? Why does this nagging emptiness persist no matter what you achieve? Carl Jung, one of history's most profound psychological thinkers, had a shocking explanation. We are the first civilization in human history to lose touch with the unconscious, with the soul. And this disconnection is quietly destroying us from the inside out. Modern man is sick because he is not whole, Jung wrote. This wasn't just some poetic statement. He meant it literally. We're experiencing a psychological and spiritual crisis unlike anything humanity has ever faced before. Today, I'm going to reveal Jung's revolutionary understanding of our modern emptiness and why he believed reconnecting with the forgotten language of the soul isn't just some new age luxury, but an urgent necessity for our survival as individuals and as a society. Let me ask you something that might sound strange. Have you noticed how our world simultaneously feels more connected yet more lonely than ever before? How despite all our technological advances and material comforts, rates of depression, anxiety, and extremism keep rising? What if these aren't just random problems, but symptoms of a deeper spiritual crisis? Jung was the first to truly understand that we're living through a unique moment in human history. For thousands of years, across every civilization, humans maintained a vital connection with what Jung called the collective unconscious, the deeper layer of the psyche that contains archetypes, symbols, and patterns common to all humanity. This wasn't just some abstract spiritual concept. For our ancestors, this connection was as real and necessary as the air they breathed. Through myths, rituals, symbols, and religious practices, they maintained a living relationship with these deeper dimensions of the psyche. But something unprecedented happened in the Western world over the past few centuries. With the rise of scientific materialism, rationalism, and technology, we gradually cut ourselves off from this vital inner reality. We decided that only what can be measured, quantified, and logically proven is real. Everything else, including the soul and its symbolic language, was dismissed as primitive superstition. We have stripped all things of their mystery and numinosity, Jung observed. Nothing is holy any longer. And this loss has left us profoundly disoriented, even as we celebrate our technological achievements. I remember talking with this successful tech executive. Let's call him Michael. On paper, his life was perfect. Fantastic career, beautiful family, luxury home. Yet he confided that he felt this persistent emptiness he couldn't explain. I should be happy, he told me. I have everything I've worked for. But honestly, I feel like a shell of a person just going through the motions. This is exactly what Jung was talking about. The peculiar emptiness of the modern person who has lost connection with the deeper dimensions of the psyche. We've gained the world, but lost our souls. Jung noticed something fascinating in his clinical practice. his modern, educated, wealthy patients often suffered from a peculiar ailment that people in traditional societies rarely experienced: a profound sense of meaninglessness. Despite all their advantages, they felt their lives lacked purpose, depth, and authentic connection. "The gods have become diseases," Jung declared provocatively. What he meant was that the archetypal forces and energies that previous generations engaged with through myths and religions don't simply disappear when we stop acknowledging them. They remain active in the unconscious, but now they emerge in distorted pathological forms as neuroses, addictions, fanatic ideologies, and psychological disorders. Think about it. We no longer have meaningful communal rituals to process grief, mark life transitions, or connect with something larger than ourselves. We no longer speak the language of symbols that resonates with our deeper nature. We've traded the rich symbolic life of our ancestors for entertainment, consumption, and endless digital distraction. And we're paying a devastating psychological price for this trade-off. Jung observed that many modern psychological conditions, from anxiety and depression to more severe dissociative states, were not just personal problems, but symptoms of a collective spiritual crisis. When the conscious mind becomes completely disconnected from the unconscious, psychological suffering inevitably follows. Neurosis, Jung wrote, is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. By this, he meant that many of our psychological symptoms arise because we've lost the capacity to engage consciously with the deeper aspects of being human, including the experience of necessary pain, loss, and limitation. Instead of facing these realities with the support of cultural wisdom and symbolic understanding, we are left to deal with them in isolation, often through unhealthy coping mechanisms. But Jung noticed something even more disturbing on a societal level. The same disconnection that produces individual psychological suffering also manifests collectively as extremism, fanaticism, and destructive mass movements. When people lose touch with the inner world of meaning and symbol, they become vulnerable to ideologies that promise to fill that void with simplistic answers and false certainties. Fanaticism, Jung noted, is always a sign of repressed doubt. The more disconnected we become from our own psychological depths, the more desperately we seek something external to believe in absolutely. This insight helps explain one of the great paradoxes of our time: why the most technologically advanced, educated societies can suddenly embrace extreme ideologies or fall under the spell of charismatic demagogues. When the rational mind becomes completely severed from the unconscious, people become surprisingly irrational in their attempts to find meaning. Just look at what happened in Jung's own lifetime. He witnessed how Germany, one of the most culturally and intellectually sophisticated nations in Europe, descended into Nazi barbarism. This wasn't despite German rationality and technological advancement. In a profound sense, it was because of the one-sided development that had neglected the soul. Jung wrote urgently about this in the 1930s, recognizing in the mass movements of his time not just political phenomena, but psychological eruptions. The return of repressed archetypal forces in destructive form. When denied conscious acknowledgement, these forces don't disappear. They take possession of individuals and entire societies from below. We can no longer deny, Jung warned, that the dark stirrings of the unconscious are effective powers. The unconscious is the psyche that reaches down from the daylight of consciousness into the dark depths of nature's past. For 2 million years, man has been born of woman, conceived and carried for 9 months beneath the heart. This primal experience, together with an equally long period of primitive life, still forms the unconscious. In other words, we can't simply think our way out of being human, with all the primal, irrational, and symbolic dimensions that entails. When we try to live as if we're just rational computers in human form, the forgotten aspects of our nature inevitably return, often in distorted, destructive ways. This psychological insight helps explain why, despite unprecedented access to information and education, we're seeing rising polarization, conspiratorial thinking, and the return of extremist ideologies we thought were confined to history books. The more we try to live by reason alone, the more irrationally we behave. So what exactly did we lose? What is this vital connection that modern people are missing? Jung identified several dimensions of our disconnection from the soul. First, we've lost our relationship with what he called archetypes, the universal patterns and primordial images that structure human experience across cultures and throughout history. These include archetypes like the mother, the father, the hero, the trickster, death and rebirth, and countless others. Patterns that appear in myths, dreams, and creative expressions worldwide. For our ancestors, these archetypes weren't abstract concepts, but living realities engaged through stories, rituals, and religious practices. They provided frameworks for understanding life's most profound experiences: birth, death, love, conflict, transformation. When we lose conscious relationship with these patterns, we don't stop being influenced by them. We just become unconscious of how they're shaping our lives. Second, we've lost our connection to symbolic thinking. Modern consciousness is dominated by literal, linear, logical thought. This has given us incredible technological capabilities, but it's left us unable to engage with the symbolic dimension where the psyche naturally operates. Dreams, myths, art. These symbolic expressions speak directly to parts of ourselves that logical discourse can't reach. I remember working with one particularly rational client, a brilliant scientist who dismissed all non-scientific ways of knowing. Yet in therapy, she began having powerful dreams filled with mythological imagery she couldn't explain. These dreams were her psyche's attempt to reconnect her with dimensions of reality her conscious mind had rejected. As she learned to engage with this symbolic material, the emptiness she'd felt throughout her successful career gradually began to fill. Third, we've lost our sense of participating in something larger than ourselves. Traditional cultures experience themselves as part of a living cosmos, filled with meaning and purpose. Modern consciousness, in contrast, tends to see us as isolated individuals in an indifferent universe, a perspective that breeds existential anxiety, no matter how materially comfortable we become. And fourth, we've lost our connection with genuine community and collective ritual. Despite our hyperconnectivity through social media, many modern people experience profound isolation. We lack the genuine communal practices that traditionally helped individuals integrate their personal experiences within a shared symbolic framework. Jung understood that the cost of these disconnections wasn't just psychological discomfort. It was a profound spiritual crisis that threatened our viability as a species. A humanity that has lost touch with its soul eventually loses the capacity to sustain itself. But Jung wasn't a pessimist, despite his stark diagnosis of our modern condition. He believed we stand at the threshold of an unprecedented evolutionary opportunity. The very consciousness that separated us from our instinctual and symbolic roots could now be used to forge a new, conscious relationship with these dimensions. Not by regressing to pre-modern consciousness, but by integrating rational awareness with these deeper realities. We are living in what the Greeks called the kairos, the right moment, for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. Jung wrote, "This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing." In other words, our spiritual emptiness isn't just a crisis. It's also an evolutionary invitation. The disconnection we experience so painfully might actually be a necessary phase in the development of a more integrated form of consciousness, one that includes rational thought but isn't limited to it. But how do we begin to reconnect with these lost dimensions of being human? Jung offered several paths forward, both for individuals and for our collective future. For individuals, the reconnection begins with acknowledging the reality and importance of the inner world. Dreams, imagination, creativity, emotional life. These aren't just subjective froth on the surface of real, physical existence. They're vital expressions of the soul that deserve our attention and engagement. Jung encouraged people to develop what he called active imagination, the capacity to engage consciously with unconscious material through creative expression, dream work, and symbolic thinking. By learning to dialogue with the unconscious, rather than either identifying with it completely or repressing it entirely, we can begin to heal the split in our psyches. I've seen this process unfold countless times in individuals. How engagement with dreams, creative expression, or meaningful symbolic practices gradually transforms that sense of emptiness into a feeling of connection and purpose. The change isn't always dramatic or sudden, but it's profound and lasting in a way that external achievements rarely are. On a collective level, Jung believed we need new, symbolic containers that can speak to modern consciousness while honoring the archetypal dimensions of experience. These won't look exactly like traditional religious forms, but they need to serve the same psychological functions, helping us engage consciously with the full range of human experience, including suffering, limitation, and transformation. We need a new wisdom for a new age, Jung wrote, one that integrates scientific understanding with psychological and spiritual insight, rather than seeing them as opposed. Jung himself wasn't prescriptive about what these new forms would look like. He recognized that genuine symbolic expressions emerge organically from lived experience, not from intellectual prescription. But he did believe that individuals who undertake their own inner work contribute to this collective renewal, whether or not they see immediate large-scale results. One thing Jung was certain about: the path forward isn't going backward. We can't simply return to pre-modern forms of consciousness, nor should we try. The development of rational scientific thinking has brought genuine evolutionary achievements that need to be integrated, not rejected. But integration means acknowledging the limits of rationality and creating space for other dimensions of human experience. The only meaningful life is a life that strives for the individual realization, absolute and unconditional, of its own particular law, Jung wrote. We need wholeness, not perfection. This wholeness includes our rational capacities alongside our emotional, intuitive, and symbolic nature, all the dimensions that make us fully human. The stakes of this integration couldn't be higher. Jung believed that our survival as a species might depend on whether we can reconnect with the forgotten language of the soul before our one-sided development leads to catastrophe. Whether through environmental destruction, technological hubris, or the eruption of repressed archetypal forces in ever more destructive forms. What makes our moment unique is that, for the first time in history, this reconnection would be a conscious choice rather than simply an inherited cultural framework. We have the opportunity to develop a relationship with the depths of the psyche that includes our rational awareness rather than excluding it, creating the possibility of a more integrated consciousness than any previous era has achieved. I've seen what this integration looks like in individuals who've done this work. A quiet sense of meaning and purpose that doesn't need constant external validation. A capacity to face life's inevitable suffering without being destroyed by it. An ability to engage deeply with others while maintaining a strong connection to one's own inner truth. And a sense of participating in something larger than oneself without surrendering critical thinking. These qualities don't come from following a prescribed spiritual formula or adopting new beliefs. They emerge organically from the patient, persistent work of building a relationship with the forgotten language of the soul through dreams, creativity, genuine community, meaningful ritual, and the courage to face one's own depths. And here's what's fascinating. While Jung framed much of this in psychological terms, modern neuroscience is actually validating many of his insights. Research in areas like embodied cognition, the default mode network, and the neurobiology of meaning suggests that the symbolic, narrative, and relational dimensions of experience aren't luxury add-ons to our basic biological functioning, but core aspects of how human consciousness operates. We're wired for meaning, for symbol, for connection, not just as cultural constructs, but as essential aspects of our neurological functioning. When these dimensions are missing from our lives, we don't just feel subjectively bad. Our brains don't work as they evolve to function. This research confirms something Jung observed decades ago. Our modern emptiness isn't just a philosophical problem or spiritual luxury concern. It's a fundamental threat to human thriving, as real and consequential as any physical health crisis. The good news is that unlike our ancestors, we have unprecedented access to the world's wisdom traditions, symbolic systems, and psychological insights. We can draw consciously from these resources in ways that previous generations couldn't imagine. The internet, despite all its shadow aspects, has made the collective wisdom of humanity available to anyone with a connection. But information alone isn't enough. Jung was clear that intellectual understanding doesn't heal the split between conscious and unconscious. only lived experience and genuine engagement with the symbolic dimension can do that. Reading about symbols isn't the same as experiencing their transformative power. Studying mythology isn't the same as allowing its patterns to illuminate your own life. Knowing about archetypes intellectually isn't the same as recognizing their activity in your dreams and relationships. The path back to the soul requires more than information. It requires participation. This might mean working with dreams, engaging in creative expression, finding meaningful community, developing contemplative practices, connecting with nature, or any number of other approaches that build bridges between conscious awareness and the deeper currents of the psyche. What matters isn't the specific form these practices take, but the quality of attention and engagement we bring to them. The willingness to listen to the forgotten language of the soul with genuine openness rather than either credulity or dismissal. Your vision will become clear, Jung wrote, only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. This awakening isn't just about individual well-being, though that certainly matters. It's about the possibility of a collective renewal, a culture that has developed powerful rational capacities without sacrificing its connection to the symbolic, emotional, and relational dimensions that make us fully human. Jung believed that despite the darkness of our modern condition, or perhaps because of it, we stand at the threshold of an extraordinary possibility. The very consciousness that separated us from our instinctual and symbolic roots could now be used to forge a new, conscious relationship with these dimensions, not by abandoning reason, but by recognizing its proper place within a larger conception of what it means to be human. The decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not? Jung wrote, that is the telling question of his life. How we answer this question, not just intellectually but through how we live, will determine not only our individual fate, but the future of our civilization. So here's where this leaves us. We are indeed the first civilization in human history to lose touch with the unconscious, with the forgotten language of the soul. This disconnection has created a unique form of suffering, the emptiness that persists no matter how much external success we achieve. But we're also the first civilization with the opportunity to forge a new, conscious relationship with these deeper dimensions, one that integrates rather than rejects our rational capacities. This is not about abandoning modern consciousness, but about expanding it to include what we've forgotten. The path back to the soul isn't about adopting new beliefs or following prescribed formulas. It's about developing a living relationship with the symbolic dimension of experience through dreams, creativity, meaningful community, and the courage to face our own depths. This reconnection isn't just a luxury for those interested in spiritual growth. Jung believed it's an evolutionary necessity if we're to navigate the unprecedented challenges of our time without destroying ourselves in the process. The emptiness we feel is not just personal discomfort, it's a warning signal about our collective direction. But it's also an invitation to a more integrated form of consciousness than any previous era has achieved. The question is whether we'll accept this invitation before our one-sided development leads to catastrophe. As Jung put it, we are living in what the Greeks called the kairos, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing. Whether we experience this change as a crisis or a transformation depends largely on our willingness to reconnect with the forgotten language of the soul, not by abandoning our modern achievements, but by recognizing their proper place within the larger territory of what it means to be fully human. If you found this perspective valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores the depths of human psychology. Every day, we dive into topics that challenge conventional wisdom and offer new perspectives on what it means to be human. Until next time, remember that your emptiness might not be a personal failing, but a call to reconnection with dimensions of yourself and of reality that our modern world has taught you to forget.